The wagon began to slide before Clara Bennett understood that the road had disappeared. One moment, the rear wheels were grinding through slush on the narrow mountain track, the iron rims striking buried stone with hard little knocks. The next, the whole wagon leaned toward the ravine, as if some great hand had caught the canvas cover and pulled. The mare on the left screamed. The other horse went down on its knees. Clara grabbed the wooden rail with one hand and the bundle under her coat with the other. Then the slope above them let go. Snow came first, a rolling white sheet that swallowed the horses to their shoulders. Shale followed, clicking and clattering inside the heavier roar. A dead pine, dragged sideways by the slide, struck the wagon box. Clara heard the axle split. She remembered the clean crack of it more clearly than she remembered falling. The world turned brown, white, black. When she opened her eyes, her mouth was full of snow. She spat and coughed until pain shot through her ribs. The wagon lay on its side against a tangle of rock and broken branches. One wheel spun slowly above her, squealing once each turn. The canvas roof had ripped away. A flour sack had burst open, and the powder was turning to paste where snow blew over it. A jar of peaches had broken near her boot. Yellow fruit and glass glittered together under a thin skin of ice. Clara did not look at the horses. She pulled open her coat. The baby was still there. For half a second, that was not enough. Owen. Her voice came out thick and small. The newborn's face was pale under his knitted cap. His lips looked darker than they had that morning. He made no sound. Clara pushed one glove off with her teeth and held a finger under his nose. She could not feel anything. Panic climbed into her throat. She bent until her cheek nearly touched his mouth. A faint breath warmed the skin under her eye. She closed her eyes. "All right," she whispered. "All right, you stay with me." There was no answer but the spinning wheel. The wind found them a minute later. It came down the pass with a long hollow moan and drove loose snow across the wreck. Clara crawled from beneath the broken sideboard, dragging one leg until the feeling returned in a hot, ugly wave. She stood, failed, and stood again. Her right knee would bear weight if she kept it nearly straight. The supplies had scattered down the slope. A tin cup lay upside down near the ravine. A blanket had caught in a juniper 30 feet away, already whitening under the storm. She could see the corner of her small pine chest under the wagon, but a stone as large as a washtub had pinned it shut. The quilt was closer. It had belonged to her mother. Blue squares, gray squares, scraps of old shirts, one faded red patch from a dress Clara had worn when she was 12. She pulled it from under a broken plank. Wet snow clung to the wool batting, making it heavy, but she wrapped it around Owen anyway, then tucked both ends beneath the leather belt at her waist. Inside the hem, between two lines of crooked stitches, paper crackled. The deed. That small sound steadied her almost as much as the child's breath. 3 days earlier, Sheriff Silas Rourke had stood in the yard of the Bennett place, with one polished boot on the bottom fence rail, and told her the land had never truly belonged to her husband. He had brought papers with seals and signatures, and the flat smile of a man who had already decided what the law meant. Clara had listened until he offered to save her trouble by taking the property for the outstanding note. She had gone inside, found the original deed in Thomas's old cedar box, and sewn it into the quilt before dawn. She had not stolen the wagon either. Thomas had paid half for it before he died, and Dr. Bell had advanced her the rest after Owen was born. But Rourke had called it territorial property in front of anyone willing to listen. By the time Clara set out for the federal land office at the outpost, half the town had already heard she was running from debt. Now the mountain had broken the wagon for him. She looked uphill. The road was gone beneath the slide. Downhill, the ravine vanished into blowing white. Clara knew only one thing with certainty. She could not stay beside the wreck. She tied the quilt tighter and started toward the timber. At first she walked, then she limped, then she dragged her bad leg through drifts that rose above her boots. Snow collected in the seams of her coat and melted against her wrists. Her skirt became a wet rope around her calves. Every few steps she stopped to put her hand over Owen's back. He was warm, too warm. That frightened her more than the cold. By mid-afternoon, the sky had vanished entirely. There was no sun, only a white brightness that came from every direction at once. Clara could not tell whether she was moving north or east. Trees appeared suddenly and disappeared behind her. The wind rubbed ice crystals against her cheeks until the skin went numb. She found the cedar by accident. Lightning had split it years ago. Half the trunk was dead, twisted open along one side, and the center had burned hollow. A black gap showed beneath the snow plastered against the bark. Clara crawled inside. The space was narrow enough that her shoulder scraped wood on one side, and her knee touched the other. It smelled of wet bark, old ash, mouse droppings, and something sweet buried deep in the grain. The wind still came through cracks, but it no longer struck her full in the face. She sat with her back against the trunk and pulled Owen out from under her coat. His cheeks were red now. He did not wake when she touched them. She opened his wrappings with clumsy fingers. His shirt was damp at the collar. His tiny chest moved too quickly. When she bent close, she heard a faint clicking beneath his breath. No, she said it quietly, because saying it loudly would make it more real. Clara tried to nurse him. Owen rooted weakly, found her, sucked twice, and stopped. She shifted him, tried again, rubbed his heel with her thumb. He gave a thin sound of protest and turned his face away. The cold moved in around them. Clara pulled the quilt over both their heads and breathed into the small tent it made. Her breath smelled sour from fear. Owen's hair smelled of milk and the lavender soap Dr. Bell's wife had given her. She pressed her nose to his crown and concentrated on that smell. The worst thing would be sleep. She knew this because her father had once found a teamster sitting against a fence after a storm, eyes closed, hands folded neatly in his lap. He had looked peaceful until they tried to move him, so Clara counted, 100 breaths, then another 100. She recited the recipe for cornbread, 2 cups meal, 1 spoon salt, hot drippings, water if there was no milk. She listed every fence post on the east field she meant to replace in spring. She named the hens she had left with Mrs. Carver. When none of that worked, she bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. Owen coughed. The sound was small and wet. Clara held him upright against her shoulder. She patted his back first with her palm, then with the side of her hand because her fingers no longer bent properly. "Come on, little bird." Another cough. Again, he did not. The darkness outside the cedar deepened. Clara had no idea how many hours had passed. The storm made time useless. Her chin dropped once. She jerked awake. It dropped again. She slapped her own thigh and felt almost nothing. That was when she remembered the lullaby. Her grandmother had sung it in Kansas on summer nights when the windows stayed open and the smell of dust came through the screens. Clara had not thought of the melody in years. Thomas had teased her the one time he heard her singing it during pregnancy, telling her it sounded too mournful for a baby. Now sorrowful seemed exactly right. She began with a hum. The first note shook. The next held a little longer. Owen stirred against her chest. Clara opened her mouth and let the tune grow. She did not try to remember every word. She remembered only pieces: a river running home, grass bending under moonlight, a mother waiting by a door. She made up the rest. Her voice was not beautiful. The cold had roughened it. Twice she coughed in the middle of a phrase. Once the note broke completely and she had to start again. But the singing forced her to breathe deeply. It gave her something to do besides die. She sang until her lips split. She sang until the cedar seemed to hum faintly around her. She sang because Owen's breath continued beneath the sound, and as long as she could hear both rhythms, she could believe they were still in the world. Several miles away, Elias Whitecloud was repairing a moccasin beside a fire that had burned down to blue-edged coals. His shelter was a shallow limestone pocket above the timber line, no more comfortable than a stable, but dry. A buffalo robe hung over one side to block the wind. Cedar smoke stained the stone overhead. On a flat rock near the fire sat a tin cup, a small packet of parched corn, 2 smooth river stones wrapped in cloth, and a twist of dried yarrow. Elias had planned to wait out the storm there. He had spent enough winters on the Mogollon Rim to know the difference between bravery and foolishness. Snow did not care which name a man gave his choice before it killed him. He pulled the bone needle through leather, tested the stitch with his thumb, and stopped. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. A vibration came through the stone under his boot. Not a voice. Not exactly a pattern. 3 held notes. A pause. Then 2 shorter ones. Elias set the moccasin down. The wind screamed across the mouth of the shelter, rattling the edge of the robe. He waited. The pattern returned. He put his palm against the limestone floor. There were many sounds inside a storm. Trees split. Snow settled. Rocks shifted beneath new weight. A frightened elk could make a valley seem haunted. Elias had learned not to chase every strange thing the mountain offered, but this was human. He knew because the rhythm hesitated. Nature repeated itself without embarrassment. A human voice stumbled and corrected. The melody touched something old in him. His mother had sung a song with a similar rise at the end of each line. Not the same song, not the same language, but close enough to make the room behind his ribs ache. He sat still for a long time. 10 winters had passed since he had chosen the high country over reservation fences, army patrols, warrants, town doors that closed when he approached. 10 winters since he had learned how simple life became when a man stopped asking other men for permission to exist. The sensible thing was to remain by the fire. The song came again, thinner now. Elias swore under his breath. He packed the corn, yarrow, flint, a knife, cord, and the 2 warm stones. He rolled the buffalo robe and tied it across his shoulders. Before leaving, he poured a little water over the fire and watched the steam rise. Then he stepped into the storm. He moved downhill slowly, testing each drift with a cedar staff. Where the wind had packed the snow hard, he walked on top. Where it had piled soft, he angled across rather than sinking straight through. He kept the left side of his face toward the wind and used the direction of its sting as a compass. Every few minutes he stopped. The song was difficult to hear now. At times he felt it more than heard it, faint through tree roots and rock. Near dusk he found the wreck. The wagon lay broken in the gulch, one wheel half buried. He saw blood where a horse had thrashed, then snow over it. He found a woman's boot print leading toward the timber, then another, the right foot dragging slightly. There were no return tracks. He followed. The storm covered much of the trail, but not all. A broken crust, a dark thread caught on juniper, a shallow hollow where someone had fallen and risen again. The singing stopped. Elias stood in the white air and listened. Nothing. He nearly turned toward the ravine, thinking she might have wandered downhill. Then he saw the cedar. A scrap of blue wool showed at its base. He approached with his knife in his hand, not because he expected danger from the person inside, but because surviving alone had made caution as natural as breathing. The woman sat folded into the hollow, her back against blackened wood. Frost silvered her lashes. Blood had dried at one corner of her mouth. A quilt covered the child in her arms. Her eyes opened. They were unfocused at first. Then they fixed on him. Clara stared at the stranger standing in the storm and thought, with the calm logic of exhaustion, that death had turned out to be a man. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his dark hair tied back and rimed with snow. His buckskin coat was patched at one elbow. A buffalo robe crossed his back. His face held no smile, no alarm, no soft expression of rescue. He simply looked at her and the child. Clara's hand moved toward the silver locket at her neck. It contained the last photograph of Thomas, taken before the fever took him. The chain caught in her collar. She pulled it free and held it toward the stranger. "Take it," she whispered. The man frowned. "Take it just." Her breath failed. She tried again. "Take him somewhere warm." The stranger did not touch the locket. He stepped into the hollow and reached for Owen. Clara moved faster than she thought she could. She caught his wrist with both hands and, when he did not stop, bit the heel of his mitten. The leather filled her mouth with grease and smoke. He froze. For one strange second, neither of them moved. Then the man looked down at the marks her teeth had made and gave a short nod. "Good," he said. It was the first word between them. Clara hated him for it immediately. She also knew, somewhere beneath fear and fever and pride, that she had never been more relieved to hear another human voice. Elias crouched. "The baby first," he said. "No, he is colder than you think. He's burning. That does not mean he is warm." Clara stared at him. His voice was low and rough, with no patience for argument. Yet his hands, when he finally eased Owen from her arms, were careful. He opened his coat and tucked the baby against his own chest beneath the buffalo robe. Owen made a weak, angry sound. Clara nearly cried from gratitude. Elias pulled one of the cloth-wrapped stones from his pack, tested it against the inside of his wrist, then slid it near the child's back, separated from the skin by layers of wool. The second went near Owen's feet. "Can you stand?" he asked. Clara tried. Her knee folded. Elias caught her under the arm. "I can walk. You can fall while moving. That is not the same thing." "I said I can walk." For the first time, something almost like humor passed through his eyes. "Then walk." He looped a leather cord around her waist, tied the other end around his own, and stepped back into the blizzard. Clara followed because there was nothing else left to do. The first 100 yards nearly ended them. Clara had imagined that being found meant the worst was over. She learned otherwise before the cedar disappeared behind the storm. The wind struck from her right and shoved her sideways. The leather cord around her waist snapped tight. Elias braced, waited until she found her feet, then moved again. He did not hurry. That irritated her at first. Every part of her wanted to run toward fire, walls, any place where snow could not touch Owen. Elias moved as though the mountain had all the time in the world. After the third fall, Clara understood. Speed wasted strength, panic wasted breath, a wrong step wasted everything. Elias led her beneath a shelf of sandstone no deeper than a church pew. It was not the cave she had imagined from old adventure stories. It was a crack under rock with snow piled halfway to the ceiling. Still, the wind passed over it instead of through it. He dug with his hands in a flat piece of cedar bark until there was room for Clara to sit. Then he put Owen back in her arms. The child cried as soon as he changed hands. It was not a strong cry, but it was furious. Clara laughed once, a breathless sound that became a cough. "Good," she said, mocking the man beside her. "Is that what you say?" Elias glanced at her. This time, he built the smallest fire Clara had ever seen. He shaved dry wood from the inside of a dead cedar branch, made a nest of fibers, and sparked them with flint. He protected the flame with both hands until it caught. There was no cheerful blaze. He fed it twigs one at a time until a bed of coals formed beneath a flat stone. Clara watched his hands. The mitten she had bitten was off. Her teeth had broken the skin near his thumb. A crescent of blood dried there. "I'm sorry," she said. "No, you are not." She looked at him. He set one of the smooth stones near the coals. "No," Clara admitted. "I'm not. That is better." She would have disliked him under ordinary circumstances. He spoke as if each word cost money, and he had no intention of spending it on politeness. He did not ask about her husband or tell her she was brave. He did not say everything would be all right. Instead, he checked Owen's breathing, shifted the warmed stone, and rubbed the infant's back with 2 fingers until another wet cough came loose. The practical attention calmed Clara more than reassurance could have. She loosened her dress and tried to nurse. Owen latched, sucked, and pulled away crying. Clara tried again. Nothing came. She pressed her breast with 2 fingers. A drop appeared, then no more. Her face burned despite the cold. She turned away from Elias, pulling the quilt around herself and the child. "Drink." A tin cup appeared near her knee. "I'm fine. You are not. I can see that. Then drink." She took the cup to keep from arguing. The water was barely warm and tasted faintly of smoke. She drank too fast. Elias took it away before she could empty it. "Slow. Stop ordering me. Then stop doing foolish things." Clara stared at him with such pure dislike that a corner of his mouth moved. That was the first time she realized he could smile. He reached into his pack and cut a narrow piece from a hard block of rendered fat. Clara recoiled. "What is that?" "Food. It looks like candle grease." "It is better than candle grease." "High praise." "Eat." She put the piece in her mouth. It was salty, smoky, and so oily that her stomach turned. She almost spat it out. Elias watched her. Clara swallowed out of spite. "Happy?" "No." "Do you ever become happy?" "Sometimes when people stop talking." That earned him the first real smile she had made since the wagon broke. It hurt the split in her lip. Owen cried again. The sound erased the moment. Elias took a small leather pouch from his pack and shook it, empty. "What?" Clara asked. "I have pine meal cached north of here." "How far?" 3 miles if the ridge is passable." Clara looked outside. The storm beyond the rock shelf had thickened until the trees 20 feet away were shadows. "And if it isn't passable?" "Farther." She hugged Owen tighter. "Can he eat it?" "Thin. Little at a time." "Will it help?" "It is food." "That isn't what I asked." Elias finally looked directly at her. "I do not know if he will live." The words landed without cruelty. That made them worse. Clara looked down at Owen. His eyes were closed. One fist had worked free of the quilt and rested near his cheek, no larger than a walnut. "I need you to lie to me once," she said. Elias's expression changed. "Just once. Tell me he will live." He remained quiet. Clara swallowed. Then he leaned closer and tucked the baby's fist back into the warmth. "He is still fighting," Elias said. "So we act as though he will." It was not the lie she had asked for. It was enough. They waited an hour, perhaps 2, until the wind eased from a scream to a hard, steady rush. Elias made Clara remove her wet outer stockings and wring them before the coals. The skin of her feet was pale and wrinkled. He rubbed them with a dry scrap of wool, not gently, but not hard enough to damage them. When feeling returned, Clara gripped the rock and hissed. "Pain is good," he said. "You say that because it isn't your foot." He lifted one moccasin slightly. The side was stained dark with blood. Clara stopped complaining. They left the sandstone shelf before full dark. Elias tied the leather cord between them again. This time Clara did not protest. The route climbed. At first there were trees. Then the timber thinned and the wind gained room to run. The ridge narrowed until the left side rose into a wall of stone and the right fell away into whiteness. Clara pressed one shoulder to the rock. "Don't look down," Elias said. "I wasn't planning to." "Good. I can still hate heights without instructions." He looked back. Her sarcasm seemed to reassure him. Halfway across the ridge, they reached a break where several feet of the ledge had fallen away. Snow streamed through the gap into nothing. Elias planted his staff, tested the edge, and stepped across. Clara stopped. "No, it will hold. For you. For you too. You don't know that. I know your weight." "How?" "I dragged it out of a tree." She almost laughed, which annoyed her further. He shortened the cord between them. "Give me Owen," he said. Clara's arms tightened. Elias did not reach. He waited. That mattered. She looked at the gap, then at the baby, then at the man on the other side. Slowly, she passed Owen across. Elias tucked him under the robe. Clara put both palms against the rock, bent her knees, and stepped. Her left boot landed. Her right slipped. The world dropped beneath her stomach. The leather cord jerked tight enough to bruise her ribs. Elias caught her forearm. Clara slammed against the stone, scraped her cheek, and kicked until her boot found the ledge. For several seconds, she could hear nothing but her own breath. Elias held her until her legs stopped shaking. Then, instead of keeping her behind him, he untied the cord and gave her the free end. "Your turn." Clara stared. "To do what?" "No. You know how I choose the ground now. That does not mean I can do it. You crossed, barely, you crossed." She wanted to hit him. He placed Owen back in her arms. That made the anger worse because it meant he had already decided she would succeed. Clara stepped ahead. The wind struck her without Elias's body to break it. Snow peppered her eyes. She used the cedar staff to test the drift and chose the darker patches where stone showed the through. 5 steps, 10, 15. Then the crust broke under her left foot. She went to one knee. Pain burst through the injured joint. The quilt caught on a rock and tore along the bottom hem. Clara heard paper crackle inside. Fear cut through the pain. She grabbed the quilt and checked the seam. Still closed. Elias stood 3 paces behind her. "He did not help," she said. He said nothing. "Damn you, Elias Whitecloud." That got his attention. It was the first time she had used his full name. He had given it to her at the rock shelter, almost reluctantly. Clara planted the staff, pushed through her good leg, and stood. "Happy now?" "No," she glared. "But you are standing." She turned away before he could see that she understood. The hidden cache was less dramatic than Clara expected. Elias found a cluster of flat stones beneath a bent juniper and dug through snow to expose a narrow crack. From it he pulled a pitch-sealed bundle of buckskin. Inside was pine nut meal, dried berries, a little corn, and strips of smoked venison. Clara could have kissed the bag. Instead, she sat under the juniper and watched Elias make food for Owen. He melted snow in the tin cup, mixed a pinch of pine meal into the warm water, and worked it until there were no lumps. He tasted it himself first. Then he dipped the corner of a clean cloth into the thin mixture and let Owen suck the moisture from it. The baby swallowed. Clara leaned so close their foreheads almost touched. Owen swallowed again. A sound came out of her that was half laugh, half sob. Elias looked away, giving her privacy without making a performance of it. She fed the child a few drops at a time. When he had taken enough to quiet his crying, she wrapped him and held him against her chest. "Thank you," she said. Elias was chewing dried meat. He nodded once. "For coming after the song." His chewing stopped. "You followed it, didn't you?" He looked toward the storm beyond the juniper. "My mother sang something close." Clara waited. He did not continue. She had begun to understand that pushing him directly was useless. Silence around Elias worked like the space around a shy animal. If she stayed still long enough, something sometimes emerged. She broke a piece of venison with her teeth and ate. After a while, he said, "She sang when children were sick." Clara looked at him. She believed a steady sound gave fear something to follow back home. Did it? When I was small, I believed her. And now, Elias rubbed his thumb over the bite mark Clara had left. Now I heard a woman singing inside a storm when she should have been dead. Clara almost smiled. That sounds like belief. It sounds like poor judgment. She laughed softly. Owen stirred and settled. Night came early under the clouds. They moved into a shallow crevice nearby where Elias built another tiny fire. He warmed stones, wrapped them, and placed them around the baby's bedding. Clara drank slowly this time. She ate pine meal stirred into hot water and discovered it tasted nutty and faintly sweet beneath the smoke. For the first time in 2 days, her hands stopped shaking continuously. They sat under the buffalo robe with Owen between them. The arrangement would have scandalized every woman in Clara's church circle. Elias's shoulder touched hers. His thigh pressed along the outside of her skirt because there was nowhere else for either of them to put their legs. No desire existed in the closeness. The storm had reduced the human body to simple facts: heat, breath, fatigue, injury. Clara noticed a scar along Elias's wrist where his sleeve had ridden up. It was not a normal scar. The shape looked deliberate, a letter burned into the skin. Elias pulled the sleeve down. Clara said nothing. A few minutes later, the fire shifted and light caught the brass button at her collar. Elias went still. The change in him was immediate. His gaze fixed on the raised eagle stamped into the metal. Clara's hand moved to it. Elias did not speak. Thomas served 2 years. Mostly escort duty, he said. He came home with a cough. He was dead before Owen was born. Still nothing. Clara could feel the distance widening between them, though their shoulders still touched. "He wasn't a cruel man," she said, "but I won't pretend I know everything he did while he wore that coat." Elias's jaw tightened. "My people know what coats like that did." His voice was quiet enough that she had to lean closer to hear it. Clara touched the button. "I can cut it off." He looked at her. "I kept it because it came back in his effects. That's all." She reached for his knife. Elias put a hand over hers before she could take it. "Keep it. Why?" "Because throwing away metal does not change what happened." His hand remained over hers for 1 beat longer than necessary, then withdrew. Clara looked at the scar on his wrist again. "What does the mark mean?" Elias's eyes moved toward the fire. "They branded men who left the reservation without permission. R for return." Clara felt something cold settle inside her that had nothing to do with winter. "They branded you?" "Men brand what they believe they own." She thought of Rourke's papers, of his boot on her fence, of the way he had spoken about her land as though she were already gone. "My father once told me marriage was the only safe place for a woman," she said. "Then he arranged mine because Thomas could pay off his feed store debt." Elias looked at her. "He was kind to me eventually, kinder than my father. But I remember standing beside the preacher thinking everyone in the room had agreed on my future except me." The fire cracked. Clara rubbed Owen's back. "Maybe that's why I bit you." Elias glanced at his hand. "Maybe. I thought you were taking him." "I was. That is not comforting." "I gave him back." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. Outside, the storm groaned through the trees. Inside the crevice, Owen breathed more evenly. Clara listened to that small sound until her eyes grew heavy. Before sleep took her, she felt Elias adjust the buffalo robe over her shoulder. He did it carefully enough that she could pretend not to notice. Clara woke because Elias had stopped breathing normally. Not stopped breathing, she corrected herself through the fog of sleep. He had changed it. His breath had gone shallow and quiet. He was listening. The fire was nearly out. A red line glowed under ash. Owen slept against Clara's breast, his face damp, his mouth slightly open. Outside the crevice came a soft crunch. Then another. Clara's body tightened. Elias lifted one finger. She did not move. A shadow crossed the entrance, low gray. A wolf's head appeared beyond the fringe of snow, ears pricked forward. Its winter coat made it look larger than it was. Its nose lifted. Clara's hand went to Owen. The wolf's eyes found the movement. Elias reached for a burning stick, rolled it in the coals until one end flared and stood. The wolf backed away but did not run. Another shape moved behind it, then another. "How many?" Clara whispered. "Enough." The pack had followed the smell of food and blood, perhaps the baby's sickness too. The storm had starved everything on the ridge. Elias pushed the buffalo robe toward Clara. "Wrap him, all the way." She obeyed. He took the pouch of dried meat, tied it to a length of cord, and stepped out. "What are you doing?" "Stay. I hate when you say that." Then hate quietly. He disappeared into the blowing snow. Clara heard a sharp whistle to the left. A wolf growled. Then Elias shouted from farther downslope and through the meat. The shapes vanished toward the sound. A few seconds later he came back at a run. "Move." They left the crevice immediately. For the next half-mile the wolves followed at a distance. Clara saw them only in glimpses, one between tree trunks, two crossing a slope behind them, a dark back disappearing into a drift. Elias never turned fully around. He watched with the edges of his attention, the way a man watched weather. Near afternoon, Owen's breathing worsened. The clicking returned first. Then came a wheeze Clara could feel through the quilt. She stopped. "Elias." He turned. Something in her face made him come back without asking. Owen's lips had taken on that awful shadowed color again. Elias looked uphill, then down. The nearest protection was a granite overhang 10 yards away. He took the baby and ducked beneath it. Clara crawled after him. What's happening? He is tired. That tells me nothing. He is too tired to breathe well. Clara's hands shook. Elias opened Owen's wrappings, rubbed his chest, cleared mucus from his nose with the corner of a cloth, then held the child upright against his own sternum. Owen's head lolled. Do something. Elias's eyes flashed. I am. He cupped his hand around the baby's nose and mouth, lowered his face, and gave a small controlled breath, not forced, just enough to make the tiny chest rise. Clara stared. Again. Pause. Again. Owen coughed. Elias turned him slightly. The child sputtered and cried. That cry was the finest sound Clara had ever heard. She covered her mouth. Elias continued warming the baby against his chest until the color improved. Owen's hand opened and caught one of Elias's fingers. The tracker went still. Clara watched him look down at that tiny grip. His face changed so subtly she might have missed it on any other man. The muscles around his eyes softened. His thumb moved once across Owen's knuckles. He likes you, Clara said. He does not know better. He bit me every day for 2 weeks before he learned to nurse properly. He has good judgment. Elias handed the baby back, but he did it reluctantly. They traveled until the light went purple between the trees. The wolves disappeared sometime before dusk. In their place came another threat: lanterns. At first, Clara thought the orange points below the ridge were stars showing through the storm. Then one moved behind a tree. Another swung in a wide arc. Men. She stood quickly and nearly slipped. They found us. Elias raised the small brass spyglass he carried. Clara felt hope rise so violently it hurt. Maybe Dr. Bell sent them. Maybe Mrs. Carver told. 4 riders. Can you see who? Elias lowered the glass. He did not answer soon enough. Rourke? She asked. Yes. Clara closed her eyes. For an instant she hated herself for being disappointed. The sheriff was still law. Law meant town. Town meant a clinic, milk, a stove, a bed. He came after me. For you? Elias asked. She looked at him. What else? His gaze dropped to the quilt. The deed. Clara's hope thinned. He doesn't know I have it. He knows you left with something worth following. He would not risk men in this weather for a piece of paper. Elias gave her a long look. You have lived around kinder men than I have. No, Clara said quietly. I have lived around men who wanted to be thought kind. That distinction seemed to matter to him. They watched the lanterns move. Rourke's riders were not spread in the broad pattern of a rescue party. They stayed close to the trail, searching for tracks. Hunting. Clara thought of the papers the sheriff had brought to her yard. The way he had known Thomas's account balance down to the dollar. The way he had already spoken of her east pasture as if it belonged to him. He said the wagon was territorial property, she murmured. If he finds the wreck, he can call me a thief. He will. And if he finds me with you, Elias pulled his sleeve back enough to expose the branded R. He will call me what he needs to call me. Clara's stomach sank. You should leave. Elias looked at her. I mean it. Take the high trail. I can go down when they get closer. And tell Rourke what? That I got separated from whoever helped me. He will ask where your deed is. I won't tell him. He will ask where I went. I won't tell him that either. Elias's face remained unreadable. Clara's voice sharpened. I am trying to save your life. So was I. This is different. No. She stared at him. He looked down at Owen. Then he said, The storm does not become less dangerous because men enter it. The wind rose before she could argue further. Within minutes, the lanterns below blurred and vanished. Snow began moving sideways again. Elias tested the air, looked at the low ceiling of clouds, and swore. What? Second front. How bad? He was already moving toward a cluster of boulders. Clara followed. How bad? Bad enough to stop talking. The new storm arrived harder than the first. There was no dramatic wall of snow. The wind simply doubled. Clara took one breath and felt as if someone had slapped both hands over her mouth. Elias pushed her behind a boulder and began digging into a drift banked against its lee side. She understood without being told. A snow shelter. He cut a low tunnel with his knife and a flat piece of stone. Clara scooped loose snow backward with her good hand. The work burned her shoulders, but the movement also drove warmth into her core. Higher inside, Elias said. We sleep above the entrance. He carved the tunnel upward, then widened it into a chamber just large enough for 3 bodies. Clara packed the walls with the back of her glove. Snow fell into her sleeves, her wrist went numb. The entrance hole looked terrifyingly small. Are we supposed to breathe in there? Elias cut a narrow air shaft with a branch. If that closes, wake me. How will I know? You will feel stupid. I feel stupid now, then we are safe. She would have laughed if she had the breath. They crawled inside. The change was immediate. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the sound became a deep padded thump. Their breaths seemed loud. Water began dripping from the ceiling where body heat softened the snow. Elias spread the buffalo robe on the raised sleeping shelf. Clara sat with Owen between her knees while he blocked most of the entrance with packed snow, leaving the air hole open. They had no room to avoid one another. Elias sat behind Clara, back to back. He pulled the robe around both of them. Heat collected slowly. Clara could feel each breath expanding his shoulders against hers. She matched the rhythm without meaning to. In, out, in, out. Owen slept between the folds of the quilt against her stomach. For a while, none of them moved. Then Clara noticed her right hand. 2 fingers had stopped hurting. That should have been relief. Instead, fear moved through her. She pulled off the glove. The tips of her middle and index fingers were waxy pale. Near the side of one knuckle, the skin had darkened toward purple. Elias. He shifted around. She held the hand toward him. He took her wrist. His thumb pressed lightly near the discolored skin. Can you feel this? A little? This? No. He examined the fingers in the dim light from a tiny ember cup he had carried wrapped in bark. Clara searched his face. Am I going to lose them? I do not know. I need my hand. Yes, I have a baby. Yes, I have a ranch. He looked up. Yes, she almost shouted. Can you say anything else? Elias let go of her wrist. Do not rub it. Do not put it against the fire. Warm it slowly. Clara blinked. That sounded almost useful. He gave her the warmest place under the robe, took her injured hand between both of his, and held it against the heat of his abdomen through his shirt. Pain returned as a deep ache, then pins, then fire. Clara clenched her teeth. Still think pain is good? Elias asked. I think you enjoy saying that. The pain sharpened until tears ran down her cheeks. She let them. After a while, the pale skin flushed red around the edges. The purple patch remained. Elias mixed yarrow in warm water and wrapped the fingers loosely with clean cloth. It may blister, and then we keep it clean. Clara looked at the cramped snow walls. With what? Our excellent frontier hospital? With boiled water when we have it. She leaned her head against the wall. Owen stirred. Clara placed the baby on her lap and tried to nurse again. This time a little milk came. Not much, but enough that Owen swallowed several times before drifting back to sleep. Clara's eyes filled again. She wiped them angrily with her sleeve. Elias pretended not to see. You could say good, she muttered. Good. She laughed into the darkness. Later, with the storm hammering above them, Clara woke to a sound like distant scratching. She touched Elias's shoulder. He opened his eyes immediately. The air hole. He reached up with the branch and cleared it. A plug of powder fell onto his face. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. Elias wiped snow from his eyebrows. I am glad the mountain entertains you. It has been lacking until now. For a moment, the snow cave felt almost like a room rather than a grave they had persuaded to wait. Clara tucked Owen between them and listened to his clear little breaths. Elias? He grunted. If we live through this, I'm going to make bread. That is your plan? Fresh bread, with honey if I can find it. And coffee strong enough to wake Thomas from the cemetery. Elias was quiet. What will you do? She asked. If we live? Yes, leave town before town knows I was there. Clara stared into the dark. The answer bothered her more than it should have. She turned slightly, enough that her shoulder touched his. You could come to the ranch. No. You answered quickly. I have had 10 years to answer. I didn't ask you to move in. You were about to. I was going to offer bread. That is how people begin trapping wild things. Clara smiled despite herself. Fine. No bread. Good. Now I hope you starve. His quiet chuckle was so unexpected that she held her breath to hear it. Outside, the storm buried their tracks. Below the ridge, Sheriff Silas Rourke lost the trail completely. By morning, the storm had spent itself. The silence outside the snow cave was so complete Clara woke frightened by it. No wind battered the walls, no branches scraped. Water ticked somewhere near her ear where their warmth had begun to melt the ceiling. Elias cleared the air hole and listened before opening the entrance. Light poured through. It was a hard blue-white light, reflected by miles of new snow. Clara crawled after him and had to cover her eyes. The world looked remade. Trees stood buried to their lower branches. Boulders had become smooth white humps. The previous day's trail was gone completely. Around the cave, however, a circle of tracks remained. Wolves. Clara counted at least 5 before giving up. They waited. They were hungry. How close? Elias pointed to a print less than 6 feet from the entrance. Clara looked at the size of it and decided she had slept better not knowing. Owen woke and sneezed. Both adults turned at once. The baby blinked up from the quilt, offended by the brightness, then began to fuss in a much stronger voice than he had possessed the day before. Clara pressed her face into his neck. He smelled of sweat, pine meal, and the sour sweetness of milk. "You sound terrible," she whispered. "Keep doing it." Elias was scanning the valley with his spyglass. His shoulders tightened. Clara knew before asking. "Rourke?" "Lower Pass. How far?" "A mile, maybe less." The sheriff had survived the second storm. Clara found herself almost admiring his greed. Almost. Elias pointed east toward a line of dark rock. "The Black River Bridge is below that ridge. The outpost is another 2 miles beyond. Can we reach it first? If they follow us, no." Clara looked at Owen. Elias untied his pack. "What are you doing?" "Giving them a different trail." "No," he continued, removing weight from the pack. "No," Clara repeated. "We stay together. They have horses. And guns." "Yes. That is not an argument for you to go alone. It is exactly that." He shoved pine meal, cord, and one warm stone into the pockets of Clara's coat. Then he rolled the buffalo robe and tied it across her shoulders. "You take the eastern shelf until you see the river. Stay above the spruce line. When the slope opens, go straight to the bridge. And you?" "I go south, toward them. Near them. Same thing." Elias ignored that. Clara caught his sleeve with her bandaged hand. "I am not leaving you to be hanged because you heard me singing." For a second, he looked surprised. Then he said, "I was hunted before you sang. That doesn't make it acceptable." "No, it makes it familiar." She hated the calmness of that answer. Owen shifted between them. Elias touched one finger to the edge of the baby's cap. "Get him to the doctor." Clara's throat tightened. "Come back." He looked at her. It was the closest thing to a promise either of them had asked for. "I will try. That is a terrible promise. It is the only honest one." Then he was gone among the trees. Clara stood alone on the ridge with her child and discovered that she had become accustomed to the sound of someone else's footsteps. The absence of them frightened her. She turned east. The first mile was downhill and should have been easy. It was not. Her knee had swollen overnight. Her right hand throbbed inside the loose bandage. Each time she stepped into deeper snow, the crust scraped her shins through the wet skirt. She used the staff Elias had left her and followed the terrain the way he had taught her. Darker wind-scoured patches for firmer footing. Trees bent one direction to read prevailing gusts, exposed rock where snow might hide a hole. Every few minutes she checked Owen. He was breathing. She kept moving. Behind her, far to the south, a gunshot cracked. Clara stopped so suddenly the baby woke. Another shot, then nothing. She turned back toward the ridge. There was only white. "Elias," she whispered. No answer came. She almost went back. Owen coughed against her chest. Clara closed her eyes. "Get him to the doctor." She walked on. Elias had gone south until he found a cedar branch heavy enough to make the marks he wanted. He dragged it through the snow behind him, leaning one shoulder down so the trail looked like a man carrying a burden and beginning to fail. At one point he stepped deliberately into a drift to the thigh, then crawled out, leaving an ugly disturbance. A tired posse did not need a perfect story. It needed the story it expected to see. He heard the riders before he saw them. Leather creaked. A horse coughed. Someone cursed the snow. Elias climbed onto a bare granite shelf where wind had stripped the surface clean and waited behind a juniper. Rourke appeared below in a dark fur-lined coat. 3 men followed. The sheriff's face looked swollen from cold and lack of sleep. He pointed at the false trail. "There!" One deputy bent from the saddle. "Looks like he's dragging something." Rourke smiled. "Woman's finally too weak to walk." Elias felt his jaw tighten. The men turned south toward the box canyon. He let them pass. One horse spooked near his hiding place. Elias pressed flat against the stone, hand on his knife. The deputy yanked the reins and swore. Then they were gone. Elias waited until their voices disappeared. He started east at a run. The gunshots Clara had heard were Rourke firing into a thicket after spotting movement that turned out to be a deer. Elias did not know that. He only knew he had less time than he wanted. Clara reached the Black River near noon. The river was not black now. White foam twisted between plates of blue ice. The bridge crossed a narrow canyon where the water had not frozen completely. It was old timber, one railing missing, the planks glazed with ice. On the far side stood the road to the outpost. Clara nearly wept at the sight. She stepped onto the bridge. A horse emerged from the pines ahead. Then another. Clara stopped. Sheriff Silas Rourke rode into the open, as if the mountain itself had produced him. His false trail chase had ended faster than Elias expected. The box canyon had revealed the trick when the mark simply stopped at bare stone. Rourke, enraged, had split his men. Two continued south. He and Deputy Mercer cut east for the bridge. Now he sat between Clara and safety. Rourke looked terrible. His beard was rimmed with ice. One side of his expensive coat had torn. His bay horse trembled under him. Still, his silver badge shone, Mrs. Bennett. Clara's hand tightened around the staff. "Sheriff, quite a lot of trouble you've caused." She looked at the river below. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." His mouth flattened. "Hand me the child. You're in no condition to carry him." "No." "Then come across and we'll discuss it. I am crossing." "Not with that Apache outlaw behind you somewhere." Clara's stomach tightened. Rourke leaned in the saddle. "He kidnapped you?" "No." "He forced you to travel with him?" "No." "Threatened the child?" "No." Deputy Mercer shifted uncomfortably. Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Then you're admitting you knowingly aided a fugitive." "I'm admitting he saved my son. That man is wanted." "So am I, apparently, for driving my own wagon." Rourke's cheeks reddened. "The wagon belongs to the territory pending settlement of your husband's debts." "That's a lie. I have papers. So do I." For the first time, his gaze dropped to the quilt. Clara saw it. "There you are," she thought. Not concern, not duty hunger. Rourke dismounted. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm going to make this simple. Hand over the deed and I'll take you and the child to Dr. Bell. We can sort the rest after you recover. You said I stole property. We can sort that too. You said I endangered my baby." His patience frayed. "You drove into a winter storm with a newborn. I drove because you tried to take my land before I could file my claim." Deputy Mercer looked at the sheriff. Rourke noticed. His voice dropped. "Give me the quilt." Clara moved the staff across her body. "No." He stepped onto the bridge. The horse behind him snorted. Clara backed one step. The river hammered below. Rourke reached for her. A voice came from the trees behind Clara. "I would stop there." Elias stood at the bridge entrance. He was breathing hard for the first time since Clara had met him. Snow clung to his hair. One sleeve was torn and a thin line of blood ran from his upper arm. Clara's knees almost gave way from relief. Rourke reached for his revolver. Elias did not reach for his knife. That hesitation changed the moment. Deputy Mercer noticed it too. "Sheriff," he said carefully. "Woman says he saved them." "Shut up. She's carrying a sick baby." "I said shut up." Rourke pulled the revolver. The bay horse startled at the motion, jerking sideways on the icy approach. Rourke slipped, caught the saddle, and fired by accident. The shot struck the bridge railing. Wood exploded beside Clara. Owen screamed. Everything moved at once. Elias crossed the distance to Clara in 3 strides and put himself between her and the sheriff. Mercer grabbed Rourke's gun arm. "Enough!" The two men struggled. Rourke swung an elbow into the deputy's mouth. Mercer fell against the horse. Elias could have attacked then. Clara saw it in his stance. He did not. Instead, he spoke to Mercer. "Take her to the doctor." The deputy wiped blood from his lip. Rourke stared at him. "You obey me." Mercer looked at Clara, at Owen, at the shattered railing where the bullet had passed. Then he looked at the badge on Rourke's coat. "No," Mercer said. "Not for this." Rourke seemed more shocked by that word than by the blizzard. Clara stepped around Elias. She walked across the bridge. Rourke did not stop her. Neither did Mercer. Elias followed only as far as the opposite bank. Clara turned. "Come with us." He looked toward the outpost road. "No." "Elias, doctor first. You're bleeding, so are you." "That is becoming an annoying answer," he almost smiled. Mercer had taken hold of Rourke's horse and was arguing with him in a low, furious voice. Neither man was watching them closely. Elias stepped near enough to touch Owen's cap. The baby quieted. Clara's throat tightened. "Will I see you again?" Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he took one of the smooth river stones from his pocket and slipped it into hers. It was warm from his body. "Keep moving," he said. Before she could answer, he stepped off the road and disappeared among the pines. Clara stood staring after him. Then Owen coughed. She put the stone in her pocket and walked toward the outpost. The final mile was the ugliest. There was no danger dramatic enough to fight. No cliff, no wolves, no gun. There was only exhaustion. Clara's legs shook continuously. The civilized road, packed by wagons before the storm, had become churned snow and mud. Her knee buckled twice. Each time she caught herself with the staff. The first chimney appeared through the trees near dusk. Smoke rose straight into still air. Clara stared at it. A dog barked. She tried to call out. Nothing came. Her throat had closed to a rasp. She walked farther. A cabin door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, holding a lamp. Clara opened her mouth again. No voice. So she hummed. The lullaby came out broken and thin. The woman on the porch froze. Clara took another step. The lamp lifted. Oh, sweet Lord! The woman ran down the steps. Clara made it to the fence before her knees gave way. Hands caught Owen first. That mattered. Clara let the staff fall. For the first time since the wagon broke, she allowed herself to stop moving. Clara woke under a ceiling she did not recognize. For several seconds she listened for wind. There was none. A clock ticked somewhere to her left. Glass clinked softly. The room smelled of carbolic acid, boiled linen, coffee, and a coal stove burning too hot. Then memory struck. Owen. She tried to sit. A hand pressed her shoulder down. Easy. Dr. Abram Bell leaned over her, spectacles low on his nose. His gray beard looked even more untidy than Clara remembered.
Baby.
Alive. Where? 3 feet away. If you tear that hand open climbing out of bed, I will personally nail your skirt to the mattress. Clara turned her head. A wooden cradle stood beside the stove. Owen slept inside it, wearing a clean white gown that was too large for him. His cheeks had color. A folded towel lifted and fell over his chest with each breath. Clara began crying before she realized it. Dr. Bell pretended to busy himself with a bottle. How long? She asked. Since you arrived? 18 hours. I slept 18 hours? Closer to 14. You spent the first 4 trying to convince everyone that the walls were moving. Clara wiped her face with the back of her left hand. Did I say anything embarrassing? You threatened to bite me. She closed her eyes. That sounds possible. You also demanded pine meal. Her eyes opened. Dr. Bell nodded toward a small bowl on the table. Deputy Mercer brought some from your pocket. Mrs. Harlan has been mixing a little into goat's milk. The boy takes it well. Clara stared at Owen. His lungs, congested, but better than they have any business being. Another night out there might have changed that. He looked at her with a physician's weary disapproval. You, on the other hand, have fever, bruised ribs, a knee that looks like a purple cabbage, and frost injury to 2 fingers. Clara lifted the bandaged hand. Will I lose them? Not if infection stays away. Whoever warmed them did it slowly. That helped. Elias. Dr. Bell paused. White Cloud? You know him? I know of him. His tone made Clara sit a little straighter. What do you know? That men who dislike him have done most of the talking. That is not an answer. It is the most honest one I have. He unwrapped the hand carefully. Blisters had risen along the fingers. One patch of skin remained dark and angry but not black. Dr. Bell cleaned it with warm water while Clara gripped the blanket. He saved Owen, she said through her teeth. I gathered that. He saved me too. The doctor glanced up. Mercer said as much. Where is Mercer? Sleeping in my shed after bringing you here and then riding back out to collect 2 fools who followed the sheriff into a box canyon. Clara almost smiled. And Rourke? The clinic door opened before Dr. Bell could answer. Cold air came first. Sheriff Silas Rourke followed. He had found another coat. This one was plain brown wool. The silver badge was pinned neatly to it, polished as if the previous day had not happened. Clara's body tightened instinctively, Dr. Bell noticed. Close the door, he said. You're letting the heat out. Rourke closed it. Mrs. Bennett. Clara said nothing. His eyes moved to the cradle, then to her quilt folded on a chair. There it was again, the glance. Glad to see the boy survived, he said. No, you aren't. Dr. Bell coughed into his fist to hide something. Rourke's face hardened. You're under considerable strain. I was shot at yesterday. The firearm discharged accidentally, while you were pointing it in my direction. Clara, Dr. Bell said mildly. Save your strength. She understood. Let him speak. Rourke took a folded paper from his coat. I am placing you under notice of arrest for unlawful possession of a wagon held against your husband's outstanding debt, flight from a territorial claim proceeding, and reckless endangerment of a child. Dr. Bell stopped cleaning Clara's hand. You are not arresting her from this bed. I'm serving notice. You can serve it to the coal bucket. Rourke ignored him. I'm also taking custody of any disputed property relevant to the Bennett estate. His gaze returned to the quilt. Clara felt strangely calm. The mountain had been simpler. The mountain tried to kill everyone equally. Rourke dressed greed in vocabulary. You mean my deed, she said. He smiled without warmth. If you possess such a document, it belongs in evidence. No, you don't have a choice. Clara looked at Dr. Bell. Do you have your ledger? The doctor frowned. My patient ledger? And ink. Of course. Good. I want a witness. Rourke's smile faded. Clara swung her legs over the side of the bed. Dr. Bell started to object. I'm not standing, she said. Yet she reached for the quilt. Her right hand could barely pinch the fabric. She used her teeth to catch a loose thread at the bottom hem, the same seam that had torn on the ridge. Rourke stepped forward. Dr. Bell stepped between them. "Stay where you are. Henry, I have cut bullets out of you twice, Silas. Don't make me regret it." Rourke stopped. Clara pulled the thread free. Stitches opened. The deed slid from between the wool layers. The parchment was wrinkled, water-stained, and marked with gray soot from the shelter fires. One edge had torn, but the territorial seal remained clear. Thomas Bennett's name stood beneath the original claim, followed by the notation granting survivorship to his lawful spouse. Clara held it with both hands. For a moment she saw Thomas at the kitchen table, coughing into a cloth while he explained where the document should be kept. She had been angry with him then for talking about death, as though it were an appointment he expected to keep. Now she understood why he insisted. Dr. Bell took the paper carefully. He adjusted his spectacles. Rourke's face changed. "Not much. Enough." "You knew," Clara said. He recovered quickly. "That proves nothing without verification. It proves you lied when you said there was no surviving deed. I said the county copy was incomplete. You said the land reverted, pending debt. You tried to make me sign it over before I could reach the land office." Rourke looked toward the doctor. "This is a civil matter." Dr. Bell was reading the lower section. "No," he said. "This is interesting." Rourke's jaw tightened. "What?" "The witness signature. Ezra Cole." "So?" "Cole was federal surveyor for this district, and this seal predates the county filing you showed me last month." Clara looked between them. Dr. Bell set the deed on his desk. "I am making a copy of every legible line. Then I am sending the original with Mercer to the federal land office under medical seal." Rourke stepped forward again. "You have no authority. I have the authority to protect my patient's property from being removed while she is incapacitated. That is not law. No, it is common sense. You should try it." For a few seconds, Clara thought Rourke might draw his gun inside the clinic. Instead, he looked at the cradle, then at the deed, then at Clara. "You think one dirty scrap changes what people know about you?" he said quietly. "You ran into a storm with an infant and spent 3 days with a wanted Apache. Half this town already thinks you lost your mind after Thomas died." Clara felt the old fear rise, the fear of whispers, church pews, women lowering voices when she entered the store. Then she remembered lying in a dead cedar with ice forming on her eyelashes. Compared to that, gossip seemed very small. "Then half the town can think harder." Dr. Bell coughed again. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Clara continued, "And if you accuse Elias of kidnapping me, I will say under oath that he saved us. Mercer saw enough at the bridge to know you were the one pointing a gun." The sheriff turned pale beneath the windburn. "You would testify for him?" "Yes." "Against the law? Against you?" The distinction landed. Rourke folded his notice slowly. "This isn't finished." Clara leaned back against the pillow. "No, but it finally started." He left without slamming the door. That frightened her more than anger would have. Dr. Bell waited until the sheriff's boots faded from the porch. Then he let out a breath. "Well." Clara looked at him. "I was rude, very. Did I do it well?" "Exceptionally." She smiled. Then she looked toward the window. "Has anyone seen Elias?" The doctor shook his head. "Mercer said he vanished before the road." Clara's smile disappeared. She rose despite Dr. Bell's protest and crossed the room on an aching leg. Outside the street was a mixture of snow, horse manure, and brown slush. Men cleared roofs. A blacksmith hammered ice from a wagon wheel. Somewhere bread was baking. The smell drifted from a boarding house and made Clara suddenly hungry enough to feel sick. There was no Elias. She went to the edge of the porch. "Elias!" Her voice cracked on the name. A few people looked up. No one answered. Clara stood until Dr. Bell wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and made her come back inside. When she changed clothes that evening, she found the river stone in her coat pocket. It was cold now. Of course it was. Still, she held it in her palm for a long time. 3 days later, Deputy Mercer carried the deed to the federal office with a letter from Dr. Bell and a sworn statement from Clara. He added one of his own describing the bridge, the accidental shot, and Rourke's attempt to seize the quilt before Clara reached medical care. Rourke tried to stop him. Mercer rode out before dawn. For the next 2 weeks, Clara recovered in the room behind the clinic. Owen recovered faster. His cough loosened and then diminished. He gained strength. He began waking hungry enough to howl at 2 in the morning, which Clara treated as excellent news despite the exhaustion. Her milk returned gradually with food, water, warmth, and rest. Mrs. Harlan, the woman who had first seen Clara at the fence, brought goat's milk and fresh biscuits. Dr. Bell's wife sent clean cloth for Clara's hand. Deputy Mercer visited once, stood awkwardly by the door, and apologized for not refusing Rourke sooner. "You refused when it counted," Clara told him. He looked at the floor. "Wish I'd done it before, so do I." He looked up, surprised by the lack of comfort. Clara smiled faintly. "Regret should be useful, Mercer. Otherwise, it's just another way to waste time." A month later, a federal marshal arrived with 2 officials from the Territorial Land Office. They did not arrest Rourke that day. Real life proved less satisfying than stories. They asked questions. They opened ledgers. They compared dates, seals, and account books. They interviewed the bank clerk who had notarized a transfer Clara had never signed. They found that Rourke had used 3 disputed estates in 2 years to move land through relatives and business partners. The Bennett claim was only the easiest thread to pull. Once pulled, the rest began to come apart. Rourke stopped wearing his badge before spring. His resignation was described publicly as temporary pending review. Everyone in town understood what that meant. Clara did not attend the meeting where he surrendered the star. She was home by then. The Bennett cabin had survived the winter better than expected. One shutter was gone. Part of the shed roof had collapsed. 2 fence lines were buried or broken. The pump handle had frozen and cracked. But the house stood. Clara stepped through the door carrying Owen and smelled dust, cold ashes, mouse nesting, and the faint cedar scent of Thomas's old tool chest. She cried for exactly 5 minutes. Then she opened the windows, even though the air was cold, and began cleaning. Grief had once made the house feel like something Thomas had left her inside. Now it felt like hers. That difference changed everything. Spring did not arrive gently. It came in mud. Snow slid from the roof in heavy sheets. The creek behind the barn rose brown and loud, carrying branches, fence rails, and once the bloated body of a coyote downstream. The yard turned to a sucking field of clay that tried to keep every boot placed in it. Clara loved it. Mud meant thaw. Thaw meant ground soft enough for a shovel. She started with the east fence. The work was clumsy because 2 fingers on her right hand would not fully close. Dr. Bell said sensation might improve. He also said it might not. Clara learned to wrap the palm before labor and use her left hand more than she ever had. She set one post the first day. It leaned. She pulled it out. The second leaned the other direction. She swore loudly enough that Owen, lying in a basket on the porch, startled awake. "Sorry." He blinked at her. "I am improving your vocabulary too early." The third post stood straight. Clara rested her forehead against it and laughed. That evening she made the bread she had promised herself in the snow cave. The loaf came out heavy because the yeast was old. She ate 3 slices anyway, standing at the table with butter melting through the crumb. She poured coffee strong enough to float a spoon and held the cup between both hands. Thomas's chair sat across from her. For months after his death, she had avoided looking at it. That night she dragged it to the wall and used the space for Owen's cradle. It was not betrayal. It was furniture. That realization freed something in her. Over the next weeks, Clara built routines from small acts. She rose before sunrise because Owen did. She fed him, changed him, wrapped him in a shawl, and carried him outside while she scattered grain for the surviving hens Mrs. Carver returned to her. She repaired roof shingles while the baby slept. She patched Thomas's old trousers into work aprons. She washed bandages in a pot on the stove and hung them beside diapers on the line. Some nights she woke with the taste of snow in her mouth. She would sit upright, certain the cabin walls had vanished and the storm was pressing against her face. Then she heard the clock, the stove, Owen breathing. She kept the river stone beside the bed. On those nights she held it until her heart slowed. She did not sing the lullaby. Not yet. It belonged to the storm too completely. In April, Deputy Mercer arrived with a packet from the Territorial Office. Clara wiped flour from her hands before opening it. The federal verification recognized the Bennett claim as valid. The alleged transfer used by Rourke had been declared fraudulent. The debt against the wagon had been misrepresented. Thomas had paid the final installment 2 months before his death. There was also a formal notice that Silas Rourke had been removed from office pending prosecution for fraud, coercion, and misuse of territorial authority. Mercer watched Clara read. "Well?" he asked. She read the first page again. "I own my land. You always did." "No." He frowned. Clara folded the paper carefully. "On paper, maybe. But I spent years thinking ownership was something men could move around me while I stood still." Mercer shifted his hat between his hands. "And now? Now I know where the deed is." She tapped her chest. He smiled. The line sounded sentimental even to her, so she ruined it deliberately. And I have 3 copies in different places, because I am not walking through another blizzard for parchment. Mercer laughed. Before leaving, he told her Rourke had moved into a boarding room near the rail stop while waiting for the hearing. Clara discovered she felt almost nothing. She had imagined revenge during the coldest hours on the mountain. In the cedar, she had pictured Rourke losing his land, his badge, his money, perhaps his teeth. Now she had fence posts to set. His downfall had become paperwork. That seemed appropriate. The first sign of Elias came in May. Clara found 3 pinyon saplings leaning against her porch before sunrise. Their roots were wrapped in damp moss. No tracks remained in the hard ground except one faint moccasin print near the water barrel. Clara stood over the saplings with her hands on her hips. "You could knock," she said to the empty yard. A raven answered from the barn roof. She planted the trees on the eastern slope. Pinyon did well in poor soil if given patience. Elias had shown her how to grind the nuts, but she had never thought about where the food came from beyond the tree itself. Now she understood the value of planting what might feed someone years later. She added 2 more saplings from a trader passing through the outpost, then 4. By early summer, a crooked young grove stood above the creek. Mrs. Carver called it Clara's foolish forest. Clara accepted the name affectionately. Elias appeared in person on a warm evening in June. Clara was on the roof. She had one leg hooked around the ridgepole and a hammer between her teeth when Owen began making excited sounds from his blanket under the cottonwood. Clara looked down. Elias stood at the edge of the clearing. He carried no pack. His hair was shorter. The wound on his upper arm had healed into a narrow scar. For a moment, Clara forgot to breathe. Then anger arrived, useful and familiar. She climbed down too quickly, slipped on the ladder, and landed hard enough to jar her teeth. Elias moved forward instinctively. She pointed the hammer at him. "Don't." He stopped. "You vanished. Yes, for 3 months. Yes, I thought you were dead." He considered that. "I was not." Clara stared at him. Then she threw the hammer. Not at him, near him, mostly. It struck the dirt 2 feet from his boot. Elias looked down at it. "I expected bread." Clara's anger cracked. "You said bread was a trap. I have reconsidered." She laughed despite herself, then pressed both hands over her face because the laugh turned dangerously close to crying. Elias waited. He had always been good at waiting. When Clara lowered her hands, he was looking at Owen. The baby had rolled onto his stomach and was chewing the edge of his blanket. "Come see him," she said. Elias approached slowly. Owen looked up. For one long second he studied the stranger. Then he grinned. It was a wet, toothless grin that transformed his entire face. Elias crouched. Owen reached for his finger. The same tiny hand that had gripped him beneath the granite overhang now closed with surprising strength. "He remembers you," Clara said. "No. Let me have this." Elias's mouth softened. "All right." They ate on the porch. Clara served fresh bread, beans cooked with onions, and pine meal sweetened with a little honey she had traded for at the outpost. Elias ate the first slice of bread without comment. Clara waited. He ate a second. She smiled. "That good? It is food. You walked into a blizzard for my song, and this is how you repay me." He tore another piece. "This is my third. Actions speak louder?" "Usually." They sat as twilight moved through the yard. Clara wanted to ask where he had been. She wanted to ask whether soldiers still looked for him, whether the branded letter on his arm could ever stop meaning what other men decided it meant. She wanted to ask whether he had thought of her. Instead, she told him about the fence posts. He listened. She told him Mercer had delivered the verified claim. He nodded. She told him Rourke had lost the badge. That made Elias look toward the mountains. "Good?" Clara asked. He considered the word useful. "You really refuse to make anything satisfying. A badge can be removed. A man does not change because the medal is gone." Clara knew he was right. She disliked him briefly for it. "His trial is in autumn. Will you go? I have to testify." Elias's shoulders shifted. Clara noticed. "You won't be named unless necessary. I do not care about being named. That is a lie." He looked at her. "You are learning." "I learned several things on the ridge. Most of them hurt." The light faded. Owen slept in Clara's lap. Elias stood to leave. The old disappointment rose immediately. "You could stay until morning." He looked toward the tree line. "There is room in the barn," Clara added, "or by the stove. I am not asking you to become respectable. I would fail. I know." That almost smile again. He remained standing. Clara understood that forcing the invitation would turn it into exactly the kind of ownership both of them feared. So she picked up Owen and said, All right. Elias looked surprised. Good night. He walked to the edge of the porch. Clara added, There will be bread tomorrow, whether you are here or not. He glanced back. That sounds like a threat. It is. He disappeared into the trees after dark. In the morning, the third slice she had left wrapped on the porch was gone. Clara considered that progress. Elias returned irregularly through summer. Sometimes 2 weeks passed, sometimes only 3 days. He never announced himself. Once Clara found him repairing the gate hinge before sunrise. Another time he left a bundle of dried sage beside her washing basin. In July he brought a new buffalo robe and laid it over the porch rail without explanation. Clara ran her hand through the thick fur. The old one wasn't enough? It is worn. It survived a snow cave. So did you. You still needed new boots. She had no answer for that. Their relationship grew in the spaces where neither named it. Elias taught her to read certain changes in cloud shape above the rim. Clara taught him that coffee was improved by a little brown sugar, though he denied this while taking it every time. He repaired a crack in the chimney. She stitched a torn shoulder on his coat. When her damaged fingers cramped, he noticed before she said anything and took the heavier tool without comment. When he grew quiet at the sound of distant cavalry traveling the lower road, Clara did not ask questions he did not want to answer. They built trust by not demanding more than the other could give. That was new for both of them. Autumn brought Rourke's hearing. Clara dreaded it more than she admitted. The courthouse stood in the territorial seat 2 days south by wagon, a square brick building with tall windows and a flag snapping above the roof. She had been there once with Thomas to register cattle. That day she had waited outside while men discussed property inside. This time she walked through the front doors carrying her own documents. Owen stayed with Mrs. Carver. Clara wore a dark blue dress, plain but clean, and gloves to hide the worst of the scars on her right hand. Halfway up the courthouse steps she stopped, pulled the right glove off, and put it in her pocket. The scars belonged in the room too. Dr. Bell testified first. He described Clara's condition when she arrived: exposure, fever, frost injury, dehydration, bruised ribs. He described Owen's respiratory distress. He explained that removing either patient from care when Rourke threatened arrest would have posed serious risk. The lawyer representing Rourke asked whether Dr. Bell could prove the sheriff intended harm. No, Bell said. Rourke relaxed. The doctor continued. I can only prove he was willing to cause it. The room murmured. Deputy Mercer testified about the bridge. He looked miserable in a borrowcoat that pinched his shoulders. He admitted he had obeyed Rourke during earlier attempts to pressure Clara about the land. He admitted he had believed the sheriff's story about the wagon. Then he described the gunshot and the demand for the quilt. Rourke's lawyer tried to make him appear disloyal. You turned against your superior during an emergency? Mercer looked toward Clara. I stopped obeying a bad order during an emergency. That distinction entered the record. Then Clara took the stand. The clerk asked her to swear to tell the truth. Clara almost laughed at the simplicity of it. Truth had nearly killed her, saved her, cost her friends, and given her land back. Now a stranger asked her to raise one hand and promise it in 12 words. She did. Rourke watched from the opposite table. Without the badge, he looked smaller. That surprised her. She had thought power lived in the man. Some of it had lived in everyone else's willingness to believe the medal on his coat. The territorial prosecutor began with the deed. Clara explained Thomas's illness, the original claim, the survivorship clause, and Rourke's visit after the funeral. She described his offer to settle the estate by taking the ranch. She described sewing the deed into the quilt because she no longer trusted the county office. Why did you leave during the winter storm? The storm had not begun when I left. Why leave at all? Because the federal land agent was scheduled to depart the outpost. If I missed him, Rourke would have had weeks to file his papers uncontested. Did Sheriff Rourke know that? Yes. How? He told me I would never reach the agent in time. The prosecutor let that sit. Then came the mountain. Clara described the wagon sliding, the cedar, Owen's fever, the lullaby. When she reached Elias, the room changed. People leaned forward. She could feel curiosity sharpen around the word Apache. The prosecutor asked carefully, Did Elias Whitecloud take you against your will? No. Did he threaten you? No. Did he take your child? Clara paused. Rourke's lawyer looked pleased. He took Owen from my arms because I was too frozen to understand what needed to be done. I bid him for it. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the room. Clara did not smile. He warmed my son. fed him when I couldn't, guided us through the storm, built shelter, treated my hand, drew wolves away from us, drew the sheriff's posse away from us, and when we reached the bridge, he had every opportunity to attack Sheriff Rourke. He did not. Rourke's lawyer stood. Mrs. Bennett, are you asking this court to accept the word of a wanted reservation fugitive over a duly appointed officer? Clara looked at him. No. The lawyer blinked. I am asking you to accept mine. Silence spread through the courtroom. Clara continued before anyone could stop her. I am tired of men deciding that my account becomes less true depending on which man stands beside it. Elias is not here to make me believable. Rourke is not entitled to make me unbelievable. I was there. The prosecutor sat very still. Even the judge looked up from his notes. Rourke's lawyer changed direction. You admit White Cloud is wanted. I admit people want him. That is evasive. It is accurate. Did he tell you he had left a reservation without authorization? Clara thought of the burned letter on Elias's wrist. Yes. Then you knowingly accepted aid from a fugitive. I accepted aid from the only man willing to walk into that storm. The lawyer's mouth tightened. No further questions. Clara stepped down. Her knees shook after she reached the hallway. Dr. Bell offered an arm. She took it. That went well, he said. I think I may vomit, also normal. The court's decision came 4 days later. Rourke was found responsible for falsifying filings, coercing transfers, misappropriating public authority, and interfering with protected property claims. Criminal charges on the fraud counts were forwarded for sentencing. His removal from office became permanent. The judge's written order also recognized the Bennett deed without qualification. There was no dramatic cheer. No one carried Clara through the street. She collected the certified papers, bought 2 pounds of flour, a packet of needles, and a small wooden horse for Owen from a market stall, then went home. That ordinary return pleased her more than triumph would have. When she reached the ranch, Elias was sitting on the porch. He had Owen on one knee. Mrs. Carver stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and an expression suggesting she had already interrogated him enough for both women. Clara stopped beside the wagon. Elias looked up. Well? It was the first time he had ever asked her for news before she offered it. Clara climbed down. The land is mine. He nodded. Rourke is finished. Another nod. Clara waited. That is all? What should I say? I don't know. Something grand. Elias looked at Owen, who was chewing the wooden spoon Mrs. Carver had apparently given him. You came back. Clara's irritation disappeared. He meant from the courthouse. He also meant from the mountain. She sat beside him. Yes, she said. I came back. Mrs. Carver made a suspicious noise and went inside to give them privacy while pretending she was not doing so. Clara handed Owen the wooden horse. He immediately tried to put one leg of it in his mouth. He has excellent taste, Elias said. He likes wood, so do termites. Clara laughed. They watched the child examine the toy. After a while she said, I told them about you. I assumed. I told them the truth. Elias's gaze stayed on the yard. Did it help? Yes. Then good. Clara studied his profile. I also said I was tired of needing a man beside my story to make people believe it. That brought his eyes to hers. What did they say? Nothing. Then maybe they learned. Unlikely. Maybe you did. Clara smiled slowly. There you are, ruining my satisfying moment again. He handed Owen back to her. The boy protested and reached for Elias. Elias hesitated, then let Owen keep one fist around his finger. Clara saw it. She did not comment. Winter approached again. The first cold nights brought a restlessness Clara had not expected. She checked the roof twice, then 3 times. She stacked more firewood than necessary against the north wall. She filled flour jars, salt tins, bean sacks, and dried apple bins until the pantry shelves bowed. When clouds gathered above the rim, her injured fingers began to ache. The first snow came in late November, only an inch. Clara stood at the window watching it cover the yard. Her chest tightened. Owen, nearly a year old, slapped both hands against the glass and laughed. Clara could not. She smelled the dead cedar, wet wool, blood at the corner of her mouth. She heard the clicking in Owen's infant lungs, though the child beside her was breathing perfectly. Her hand shook. Then the door opened. Elias stepped inside carrying an armload of wood. He looked at Clara once and set the logs down. He did not ask what was wrong. He walked to the stove, added wood, and put the kettle on. The ordinary motions pulled her back faster than comfort would have. Clara sat at the table. Elias made coffee. He added brown sugar to his own cup without being told. She noticed and almost smiled. Owen banged a spoon on the floor. Snow whispered against the window. It isn't the same storm, Elias said. Clara wrapped both hands around the cup. I know, your body does not. She looked at him. That sounds suspiciously understanding. I can stop. Don't. They listened to the kettle settle on the stove. After a while, Clara said, I haven't sung it since the ridge. The song, yes. Why? I don't know if I can hear it without going back there. Elias looked at Owen. Then do not sing it for the storm. Clara frowned. Sing it for him. The suggestion seemed almost too simple. That night she tried. Owen was restless with a new tooth. Clara sat in the rocking chair beside the stove, the repaired quilt over her knees. Elias stood near the door, preparing to leave. Clara began with the old hum. Her voice shook on the first note. She stopped. Owen looked up. Clara tried again. This time she did not see the cedar. Not immediately. She saw her grandmother's Kansas kitchen. Thomas laughing awkwardly when she forgot a lyric, Owen's red cap in the snow. Elias standing in the tree hollow with frost on his shoulders. She let all of it exist inside the melody. The song no longer belonged to one terrible night. Owen relaxed against her. Clara changed the words. She sang about a creek after thaw, bread rising by a stove, muddy boots at a door, and pinyon trees holding green through winter. Elias listened from the threshold. When the song ended, he stayed there for a moment. Then he said, better. Clara laughed softly. You could have said beautiful. I could have, but you won't. No. She shook her head. Good night, Elias. He stepped onto the porch. Then, unexpectedly, he turned back. Clara. She looked up. It was beautiful. Before she could answer, he closed the door behind him. She smiled for a long time afterward. Years later, travelers on the eastern slope of the Bennett land would know the Pinyon Grove before they knew the house. Clara kept adding trees. Some died. Most lived. Beneath a simple shelter at the edge of the grove, she left a covered crock of drinking water in summer, dry kindling in winter, and a tin box with pine meal, salt, and matches. No sign asked who deserved them. People used the place. A freight driver once left a horseshoe in thanks. A family moving west left 3 apples. A boy from the outpost carved a small bird into one of the shelter posts. Clara never removed any of it. The ranch grew slowly rather than dramatically. She bought 2 milk goats, then a cow. Mercer, who eventually became deputy under a new sheriff, helped her negotiate a fair price on fencing wire, and was insulted when she insisted on paying him back for delivery. Dr. Bell visited twice a year and complained that she worked too hard. Mrs. Carver visited twice a week and complained about everything. Owen learned to walk, then run. He called Elias Lias before he could pronounce most other names. Elias pretended this meant nothing. No one believed him. He never moved into the cabin. Clara never asked him again. Sometimes he slept in the barn during storms. Sometimes by the stove when snow closed the upper trail. Sometimes he disappeared for a month into the high country and returned thinner, quieter, carrying news of elk or water or men he had avoided. Their bond did not become the kind of romance townspeople knew how to gossip about. It was slower, stranger, and more careful. He belonged partly to the mountain because distance had kept him alive. Clara belonged to the ranch because staying had become her way of living. Neither asked the other to surrender that. One evening in early spring, almost 2 years after the blizzard, Clara found Elias standing beside the oldest pinyon sapling. It had survived 2 winters. New green showed at the tips. Owen chased a chicken nearby, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Clara came to stand beside Elias. The foolish forest is growing, so is the boy. He ate dirt this morning. Good minerals. Do not encourage him. They watched Owen fall in the mud, sit up and look offended. Clara folded her arms. Do you ever think about that night? Elias did not need to ask which one. Yes, I used to think surviving would make it feel smaller. Did it? No. He waited. It made everything after it feel larger. Elias looked at the house. A clean quilt hung from the line. Smoke rose from the chimney. A hoe leaned against the porch. Owen's tiny boot sat upside down on the railing to dry. That is different, he said. Different from what? Smaller. Clara thought about it. Then she nodded. The sun dropped behind the rim. Cold moved quickly into the clearing, but it no longer frightened her simply because it existed. She had wood stacked against the wall, food in the pantry, copies of the deed in 3 places, neighbors who would come if she sent for them, a doctor who knew Owen's history, a grove that would one day feed people she might never meet. And somewhere between the porch and the high country, she had Elias, never owned, never promised in the language other people preferred. But present by choice, that mattered more. Owen ran toward them with both hands muddy. Clara stepped back. No. The boy laughed and changed course toward Elias. Elias, who could track through a blizzard and vanish from armed men, was too slow. Two muddy palms landed on his buckskin trousers. Clara laughed until her ribs hurt. Elias looked down at the prince, then at Owen. The child grinned. "Good?" Clara asked. Elias sighed, apparently. That night, after supper, Clara tucked Owen into his bed. The repaired wool quilt lay across the foot, its faded patches soft from years of use. The seam where she had hidden the deed remained visible if a person knew where to look. Owen pointed at it. "Song." Clara sat beside him. "You want the snow song?" He nodded. She began to sing. The melody still carried the old river and the long Kansas grass. It still held the cedar, the ridge, the wind, and the night when a stranger had followed sound through a storm. But Clara's new verses carried other things now. A warm stone in a coat pocket, a crooked fence post standing straight on the third try, a man eating 3 slices of bread while claiming it was merely food, a corrupt badge placed on a desk, a baby breathing clearly beside a stove, pinyon saplings taking root in poor ground. The song had become a record of what remained rather than what was lost. When Owen fell asleep, Clara went outside. Elias stood near the edge of the clearing, preparing to take the upper trail before full dark. He raised one hand. Years earlier, Clara might have seen farewell in the gesture. Now she understood it differently. It meant, "I am going because I choose to go." It also meant, "I know the way back." She raised her scarred right hand in return. The fingers still did not close completely. They did not need to. Behind her, the cabin windows glowed amber. The smell of cooling bread drifted through the open door. The creek carried snowmelt below the hill. Somewhere among the pines, an owl called once and waited. Elias turned toward the mountain. Clara watched until the trees took him from sight. Then she looked up at the Mogollon rim. The ridge was dark against the last light, immense and indifferent as ever. It had not become kinder because she survived it. Winter would return. Storms would come. Paper could still be forged. Men could still mistake authority for ownership. But none of those things were the whole world anymore. Clara went inside and closed the door against the evening cold. She did not lock it. The first heavy snow of the next winter came after midnight. Clara woke to the soft scrape of branches against the roof and lay still for a moment. Years earlier, that sound would have brought her upright with her heart beating against her throat. Now, she listened long enough to separate what was real from what memory tried to add. The stove still held heat. Owen snored faintly in the next room. The roof did not groan under dangerous weight. The wind came from the north but had not strengthened. Snow ticked against the glass in dry little grains. Clara put on her boots and went outside with a lantern. The yard was already white. The pinyon grove held shallow bowls of snow in its branches. She checked the woodshed latch, covered the pump, and lifted Owen's forgotten wooden horse from the porch before it disappeared under the drift. At the far edge of the clearing, she found tracks. Moccasins, fresh. They came down from the upper trail, stopped near the pinyons, and turned back toward the mountain. Beside the first tree lay a small bundle wrapped in hide. Clara opened it under the lantern. Pine nuts. Enough for several meals. She looked toward the dark timber. No shadow moved. "You could still knock," she said. The forest gave no answer. Clara carried the bundle inside, set it beside the stone mortar, and added 2 pieces of wood to the stove. Owen woke while she was grinding the nuts. He shuffled into the kitchen with his hair standing in every direction, dragging the old quilt behind him. "Snow?" he asked. "Snow, Elias?" Clara glanced toward the window. He was here. Owen seemed satisfied with that. Children understood some forms of presence better than adults. She lifted him onto a chair, mixed warm pine meal with milk and honey, and put the bowl in front of him. Outside, the snow thickened, softening the fence, the shed, and the road. The mountain disappeared behind white. Clara felt the old fear stir once, low in her body. She let it come. Then she looked around the kitchen. Dry wood, full pantry, warm child, lantern oil, blankets, neighbors within riding distance, a roof she had repaired herself. Fear was information now, not command. Owen banged his spoon against the bowl. "Song." Clara smiled. She began the lullaby. Her voice moved easily through the room, no longer forced through frozen lungs. The notes touched the windows. The cedar walls, the iron stove, and the quilt pooled around Owen's feet. Far beyond the pinyon grove, somewhere above the road where the snow had already begun to cover his tracks, Elias paused beneath the trees. The wind carried only a piece of the melody to him. It was enough. He listened until the next verse began, then turned toward the high trail and kept walking. Knowing the song no longer meant someone was lost. Now it meant someone was home.